Good evening and welcome to this November 16th, 2020 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling in to one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. Looking ahead, the agenda for tonight's 7:30 meeting includes one public hearing. Information about how to testify at this hearing is also available on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. There is no public forum tonight. The next public forum opportunity will be on Monday, November 23rd at 7:30. And as always, other avenues of communication with me and city councilors are available, including email and voicemail. And thank you all for joining us. And we are looking forward this evening to a report from the Civilian Review Board and the Police Auditor. And I am going to turn it over to Leah. Are you kicking this off or?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councilors. I see Mark is jumping in. So Mark, if you want to. No? Okay. All right. Let's start off with Lindsay Foltz. She is the outgoing chair of the Civilian Review Board. Pardon me. And she's ready. So I'll kick it over to her.
Thanks, Leah. So Mayor and City Councilors, thank you for inviting us here tonight to share a summary of the 2019 Civilian Review Board Annual Report. My name's Lindsay Foltz, and I'm here at the request of the CRB Chair, Carolyn Williams, since I served as the chair during 2019 and up until last month. So in this report, I will cover the three elements as required by ordinance, and I'll leave time for questions. I will summarize the Civilian Review Board activities for 2019, findings and recommendations, assess the performance of the police auditor, and evaluate the work of the auditor's office. So I'll start off with the meetings. The Civilian Review Board is required by ordinance to meet 4 times a year. The CRB met 9 times during 2019, and these were all public meetings. During each of these meetings, we reviewed a closed case, engaged with the training topic, and forwarded any policy recommendations to the Police Commission through the CRB liaison to that body. The bulk of our meeting is dedicated to case reviews, and we reviewed 9 cases in 2019. So to prepare for case reviews, board members are given complete access to a comprehensive and unredacted internal affairs investigative file. These materials include call logs, correspondence, body-worn camera video, in-car video, and digitally recorded interviews from complainants, officers, witnesses, and others with potentially relevant information. This fact-finding report that is generated by the Internal Affairs Investigating Officer is accompanied by the adjudication recommendations of the auditor, the EPD supervisors, and the chief of police. It was frequently noted during 2019 by many members of the CRB that these files were thorough, well-organized, and contained all the available details the CRB needed to adequately evaluate the cases. You can find a detailed summary of the cases that we reviewed in the complete report that you can find in your packet, but I thought I'd highlight some general policy issues that emerged from reviewing cases in 2019. We noted that at the time, there was a lack of specific social media policy, and that there were some issues regarding use of personal phones while on duty and for work-related purposes that emerged through reviewing a case. We noted that body-worn cameras and footage are extremely useful to the investigatory process and the subsequent review by the Civilian Review Board. There were cases where discretionary muting of body-worn camera was a challenge during 2019. The Blue Team is a software that allows for tracking uses of force and other reportable incidents. It continues to be a very, very effective tool and adds additional transparency and accountability. The Auditor's Office has kind of live access to that system and can check in daily. And this allows them to independently pull video and determine if they'd like to open files. This is an excellent supplement to the internally and externally generated complaints that the auditor's office also responds to. I will note that there are serious allegations of misconduct, which are founded in some cases repeatedly against certain officers. So seeing this over the years has had a negative impact on my confidence in the meaningfulness of the process of civilian oversight. If the auditor, chief of police, and public all agrees that serious misconduct has repeatedly been occurring, it leads me to believe that interventions, whether disciplinary or training oriented, are not always effective in remedying problems. The general public has no way of seeing these patterns since public records law prevents the release of most of the investigative materials or the disclosing of officer identity. And I'm glad that the ad hoc committee will be considering ways to improve accountability in this area, and I look forward to any recommendations that they forward to council. I'll also note there are rare occasions when the auditor and the chief do not concur on an adjudication. In March of 2019, there was one such case. The CRB was split between agreeing with the auditor and with the chief. In terms of trainings during 2019, the CRB members were polled to determine which trainings they wanted to do, and we undertook 7 training sessions on the following topics: the criminalization of homelessness, the auditor's process and purview in the classification of cases, the operations of the street crimes unit, discussion of the school resource officer program, the civilian review board responsibilities, de-escalation and defensive tactics, and the work of sexual assault support services in collaborating with law enforcement. So now I'm going to shift to the auditor and auditor's office. The auditor, deputy auditor, and staff are very capable and transparent in their work. The auditor's office thoroughly and competently oversees the investigation of hundreds of complaints a year, provides expert analysis on complex cases, and offers exemplary support to the CRB in the course of its duties. They are professional, courteous, respond promptly to CRB member questions and requests, and are open to dissenting opinions and feedback. The cases the CRB reviews in general and during 2019 are nuanced and detailed. There are many issues about which reasonable and fair-minded people may disagree, and that is reflected in our discussions and dialogue. To this end, the Office of the Police Auditor was integral in explaining the issues at hand and presenting the cases each month. As you'll see in the case summaries in your packet, the CRB could not do our jobs as well as we do if it were not for the excellent work by Internal Affairs and the Police Auditor's Office. I would like to draw attention to the volume of complaints. There's been a steady increase in complaints that the Auditor's Office and EPD receive over the past few years. There's a 20% increase in complaints for 2017 to 2018 and another 13% increase from 2018 to 2019 for a total of 446 complaints during that year. So of those 446 complaints, I'll just point out the CRB reviewed 9. I will also note that the Auditor's Office did an excellent job in community outreach in 2019 and conducted proactive public outreach, including the coordinating and implementing the city's first public safety forum for Latinx families. In closing, my final thoughts on the CRB and auditor's work. The cases the CRB reviews are complicated. They include the review of hours of body-worn footage, interviews, community members submitted photos and videos, police reports, dispatch logs, and other relevant material. The auditor and auditor's office provide the professional expertise that make these investigations transparent and understandable to the CRB. Doing this requires a very high level of professional competency, often legal in nature. I would like to thank Auditor Gissner, Deputy Auditor Pitcher, and the staff for their expertise, professionalism, and dedication. I would also like to thank all the community volunteers who served on the Civilian Review Board in 2019. It is an honor to serve with such committed, thoughtful, and insightful people. And I will end by saying it was a pleasure to serve with the CRB during 2019, and especially thank Steve McIntyre and Maury Denner for their many years of service to our community. Both of them completed their terms of service during that year. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you so much. I just want to sort of follow up on a couple of things while I'm waiting to see if counselors have questions or comments that they want to share with you. I really value these reports, which are so informative and so enlightening. And it's my hope that in the ad hoc committee that the members who haven't had a chance to, who aren't serving on the Civilian Review Board, would avail themselves of this report to see how that work is conducted, because it's, I think, very enlightening, the cases that you've reviewed and how that process plays out. And I also wanted to comment on the outreach to the community that I know Beatrice has been very much involved in, reaching out to the Spanish-speaking community. And we also have a secondary process that council has supported of focus groups and workshops to review the community safety initiative. And I think that outreach that she began, and you at the auditor's office began in 2019, will serve us well as we go through and sort of reflect on how we can serve all of the communities within our community well. So I really, I want to thank you for that extraordinary work. And the whole office and a committee for shouldering a vast number of cases. And I would be interested in hearing why the number of cases, why you believe the number of cases has increased, continues to increase year after year.
I'm sorry, Lexi, but I'll give a real quick. First of all, I think we certainly saw a surge in how people feel about camping by unhoused people on both sides, and I think to a large degree that first line customer service is probably not where our expectations would be. And so it's very easy for people to just say to someone who's unhappy about something, well, call the auditor's office. And that has happened far too often in my view. And I know that the chief and deputy chief are working very hard. We finally got dispatched to tell people that Parks and Recreation is in charge of the camping program now, rather than call the auditor's office because you're unhappy, because we certainly had a surge there. So I really think a lot has to do with that that first line customer service and trying to problem solve at that initial stage, and that initial contact stage. We had a little uptick in allegations this year, and when you see internally generated complaints, most of those are probably something that Leah or I initiated based on seeing a use of force report or hearing about something. So that was up a little bit, but it's those service complaints and policy complaints really that include that surge with regard to the homeless camping issues and the policies around that. And I don't know if Leah, how she feels about it as well. And I also wanted to add, actually with Beatrice, I think she started in 2016 or 2017. So it seems like it's just been fairly recent, but she's been working very hard. And I wanted to also recognize on the Emergency Operations Center, she's done an awful lot of work there once the COVID started in terms of translating things. So our Spanish speaking population can get some information about the COVID thing, but it certainly has been a different kind of year.
Thank you. I see Claire and then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thank you, Lindsay, and all the board members for your volunteer work on this very, very important oversight board. I really appreciate it and recognize how much work it is for you all. And thank you to staff in the auditor's office. We really lean heavily on you, and especially in recent months. I know you've been inundated in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter protesting. Has been a huge workload, and this council has been very aware of how much effort and time you have all put into doing that work right. And, you know, I know in the report, you don't try to characterize why there might be more complaints, but I think one thing that can happen is that when you are doing a good job at something, more work gets sent your way. So that could also be that more people are aware of the office, aware that this is a place to adjudicate complaints, and therefore you're receiving more. I did have a question, and I so appreciate the investment that this office has made in outreach, in true and dedicated outreach to our Spanish-speaking residents. And I'm wondering if you've seen an increase in engagement from that part of the population in terms of complaints coming in and inquiries that you could characterize.
I can speak a bit to that. With the trend that I've seen since I've started is that now that the primarily Spanish-speaking community knows somebody that speaks Spanish that works in the office, they feel more comfortable calling me, but not always necessarily with a complaint. So what I do is doing a lot of referrals out to places that can help. So a lot of times people are scared or need the additional help to like report something to EPD. So what I'll do is I'll let them know what the process is and walk them through that. So it's helpful in a sense that they recognize as somebody that they trust that's within this organization that's not EPD, that can sort of walk them through what EPD does. But that doesn't necessarily translate to an increase in formal complaints that we receive in our office, which I wouldn't say that it's a bad thing, but you know,
Right.
At least as long as they know that somebody's there, if they were to need something, then I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're providing an important service in terms of helping folks connect to the city and specifically connect to law enforcement in a way that they have confidence in. So it might not have been what was envisioned with the work, but I think from my perspective, that seems like a really positive development. So that's fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Those were my questions and comments.
Hey, Greg, and then Chris.
Yeah. Well, Lindsay, I want to say that you've done a really good job morphing over from being a staff member to a citizen and continuing your involvement with the city. So I want to compliment you on that. There's a statistic that jumped out at me, and maybe you can help me with this, Mark. The percentage of stops of African Americans looks to me to be 4 times the per capita rate of our population in the community. So if we're at 1.3%, but the stops are 5%, and that differential is 4.1%. What is behind that? Is that an issue of training? Is that an issue of certain officers stopping African Americans more than other officers stopping them? What's what's behind that stat?
Well, I've noticed ever since I've got here, and prior to the state requirements for stops to be recorded, before this, even the arrest rate was about 5%. And so now the stop state is about 5.7%, something like that. We have not seen a pattern in officers. And I don't think that they've done a deep enough dive in terms of, okay, people that might work in the city or don't work in the city. So I think the state has actually probably as vigorous of stops data program that there is. So I think that probably primarily and we can look for you. It's a better question to ask the police department if they've seen any patterns or practices. But I can tell you, ever since I've been here and gone back to the statistics, even on arrests, it was always around that 5% number. And so, as you said, with the population, it's difficult for me to sort of analyze that at this point in time. And in fact, I was pleasantly surprised that Latinx populations versus stops was lower. But in terms of African Americans, I think probably talking with the chief and Ron Tinseth, Lieutenant Tinseth, can do a better job because they have all the data and we just get that report from the state. What they did say was that they did not see a pattern or practice in that regard. But other than that, the statistics are, as you said, 3 to 4 times the population rate.
Yeah. One other thing, and this may be something that you can't answer, but it blogs somewhere else. You know, there, as we get reports from the Human Rights Commission about the number of complaints of, you know, discriminatory practices or you know, hate crimes, it always is the African American community leads the list in terms of number of hate crimes, the percentage of hate crimes that are committed against them over you know, the years that I've been on council, and that has increased and not decreased. Um, is there a correlation between the response of the police department to these types of complaints versus you know, we're just seeing a rise in them because of other factors that are impacting you know, our overall you know, race relations, not just in this community but nationwide?
My opinion is, first of all, if people feel as if there's a good reporting mechanism, which we have with the Human Rights Commission, that is more that likely to generate activity by people who feel more confident in the system. What I've at least seen from the Detective Bureau is that they do take those issues very seriously. By the same token, we are in a state that has very broad free speech allowances. And you're from Ohio, I'm from Ohio. For example, the disorderly conduct statutes are far more restrictive in terms of the language that you can use towards a person than you can here. And so for the average person, they're not going to know the differentiation between that. But for me, you know, I'm very cognizant of you're allowed to say an awful lot of things to a person in Oregon that you're not allowed to say in Ohio without getting locked up for it. And I think that's part of it too. But I think appreciate, I would be more worried about people not reporting than I would be about necessarily, oh, you moved over here, than not reporting. But again, and I also want to circle back on that first question too, is most of the contacts police have are based on radio calls. There's very little self-initiated contacts. I know that since the camping and illegal camping issues have changed, that we may see more, quote, proactive, unquote, policing, which I'm a little worried about and I'm also hopeful about. But I think that drilling down further into the data with the Eugene Police Department with Lieutenant Tinseth would be helpful.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, Chris and then Alan.
Thank you. A great report. I really appreciate it. And Lindsay, I really like the fact that you have taken this by the horns and really tried to do a job of looking at this critically. I think that's great. And the report to me is very good in terms of what it's trying to accomplish, what not only the Civilian Review Board is trying to accomplish, but what the Auditor's Office is trying to do. And when we first created this thing, my interest was to try we wanted to catch the people who were doing bad things and correct that. But an even larger issue for me was changing the culture of the police department, how we could make that culture better, how we could make that so that we didn't have to catch bad guys. The culture had taken care of that gradually over time. And so I think we've accomplished a lot of that. Many of those things have taken place. But one thing you mentioned that for me was a culture issue was the notion that you still could have incidences with a single officer receiving a lot of complaints. And I've seen this in a couple of other reports in the past where you'll have a lot of complaints about single officers. This officer got one complaint, this officer got one complaint. You'll even have somewhere one officer gets 5 complaints in the course of a year, or this officer gets 5 complaints in the course of a year. Then you'll always have these 2 or 3 that are getting large numbers of complaints. And I realize that there are some officers who may be in the university area or who may be in downtown that are going to naturally attract a lot of complaints. But there may also be officers who are attracting a lot of complaints. And your job as a civilian review board or as an auditor's office is to be able to go and say, time out, this looks, culturally, this doesn't look right. And so what I'm wanting to zero in on is how can the work you're doing more effectively deal with those kinds of officer cultural issues. So I'm not looking to say, this is a bad guy, let's drag him through the street by his heels and make sure everybody knows his name and punish him. It's more like, is this a good fit for our police department? Is this the kind of officer we want culturally within the police department? So it's something that you brought up. It's something that's been a concern to me in the past. I don't think anybody on the police department wants to keep high complaint justified officers. And so figuring out what is the mechanism, and that's just one example of the kind of cultural things I'm talking about. So for me, how can we use the CRB and the auditor's office to really work productively with the chief on achieving that kind of culture change to begin to move those things out so we don't have to wind up being after the bad guys all the time?
If I may, first of all, we wanted to, and you sort of start blending years because here we are in November talking about the 2019 report. So you sort of start blending in years. But in June of 2020, 3 officers were dismissed or resigned under investigation. And now at least DPSST, which is the training wing of the Oregon, state of Oregon police training, keeps a list of officers that have been terminated. There have actually been several, again, because of public records laws, you can't really talk about it in Oregon, unfortunately. And then in addition, we started an early intervention system through the Blue Team. And then we had the demonstration issues and things that came on. So it's sort of been parked for a little while. But you're right, there's a few officers who have a number of use of force cases over a specific time frame. We track those, we send those to the chief, and the internal affairs supervisor usually reviews all those cases, and the supervisor uses those. But there's still probably 2 or 3 that I have concerns about. The 3 that left, I had concerns about before they were gone. And also want to point out we never received complaints on about 50% of officers in the police force ever throughout their entire careers. And I think there's, as you said, a culture and a personality there that's not being captured by everyone. In addition, we have, I think probably, and Leah, you can disagree with me, the night shift has more. And I think part of that is just that response. We're low per capita, and we have a lot of officers that respond by themselves at night for volatile situations. And it might take several minutes for backup to get there. And so in my opinion, they're more likely to to manage that situation in a more aggressive manner than if they had a number of their colleagues with them to handle those things. And again, that's just the problem that I see west of the Mississippi really is that number issue. So all those factors play in. We have also a lot of young officers. And quite honestly, I think part of that too is we need more vigorous supervision. Just this week, we had 2 complaints filed of serious misconduct by 2 different lieutenants. And it was really good to see that we had a couple of lieutenants that stepped up and said, look, this is the wrong kind of behavior, and we need to deal with it through the internal affairs process. So long story short, there's an awful lot of variables involved in it. And so each and every time, we're big enough where we have big cities problems, but we're small enough where we can sort of be an incubator and study these issues. And so that's the things that we've been trying to work on. But certainly the events of the summer were disruptive from a staffing standpoint for the department. And so I think that sort of parked several of these initiatives to try to deal with those kinds of things.
Thank you. Very helpful.
All right, Alan and then Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to thank the CRB members for their work and the volunteer hours. I know it's quite a lot, actually. And in particular, you know, the folks that are on there now, but in particular, the folks that left, Maury Denner and Steve McIntyre. I had the pleasure of serving with Steve on the police commission, and his input was always incredibly valuable. So thank you to both of those folks for the years that they put on it. And I wanted to thank the staff for their, as usual, excellent work that they do. Chris and Greg asked a lot of the questions I was going to ask, but one of the questions I'd left over was related to the number of complaints that the mayor brought up. There's a table on page 43 of our packet, 13 of the annual report. They're not numbered. It's the one that classifies the number of classifications of types of complaints in the years. And when I look at that table, almost all of the complaints fall into the bottom 3 categories: inquiry, policy complaint, and service complaint. And very few actually are in what I would consider the more egregious types of complaints, allegations of misconduct, including criminal conduct. Those and incident review, I think those actually were about even. So the how Mark, Leah, how would you guys characterize this table in terms of where the complaints are coming from and the increase in complaints? Because it's mostly in the bottom half of the table. And how would you characterize those complaints as opposed to the ones at the top of the table?
Well, what I'll do, I'll segue to Leah, because I think from a time standpoint, in terms of talking about our report and the Civilian Review Board report, they're 2 separate reports. So if no one objects, Leah can sort of get into those things and talk about those particular issues as she talks about the annual report of the Auditor's Office, if that's okay with everybody.
Oh, so I'm just a little premature.
That's okay.
Okay, I'll hold my question. Maybe Leah, you can remember it, but it was like 125 increase and 124 of them were in those bottom 3. So I think that explains quite a bit if we can understand that better. But I know, Mark, you don't like to toot your own horn, but how do other cities perceive our police auditor CRB system? Where do we stand with regard to other cities on a national model in terms of, do people ask us about how our model works? Because, or, you know, how do we stand with regard to other communities that have police auditor or CRB type systems?
Well, actually, and you were around when this started. I mean, this was a system that was built over the course of about 3 years, from about 2004, 2005 to 2007. It was 3 years of hard work by an awful lot of people. And I think that's being recognized nationwide, because it's still a good blend of the investigative process, and it still allows community members to have input through a civilian review board. So actually just today I was on the phone with the city of Dayton, which is literally going to mirror our model. Nashville mirrored our model, other they didn't. Between the charter and operations, they forgot the ordinances to sort of enable everything, so they're kind of struggling. Madison, Wisconsin, Boulder, Colorado. This seems to be a method that a lot of them now have decided that they're going to make an investment in. I know there's a few police boards out there, but those have significant logistics problems. So, yeah, I think nationwide people are looking at the Eugene model as something that is functional as long as they make the investment. And council's always made the investment in this as a branch of the legislative body versus a branch of the executive body, because what you've seen in places like San Diego is the oversight is part of the executive branch of the mayor, and inevitably the funding gets cut, the number of people get cut, and by us being independent of the city manager, I think we've been able to avoid that. So I think we've been very blessed in terms of the support that we got from council and the structure that you created. Again, as I've said before, our two weaknesses are the rigidness of the Oregon public records laws. As Lindsay stated, there are only 11 people that bear witness to these investigative files that are outside of the police department. Only 11. And I think that in 2020, our community expects the kind of transparency that a lot of places had. And in fact, in the conversation with Dayton, I was mentioning that you have open public records laws in Dayton. So that's going to make your process a lot easier if you mirror that. And then, as I talked about before, the state requirements under officer-involved shootings continue to just trouble me significantly, because it doesn't allow us to have a process in which we can deliver to the community what we would expect in terms of the knowledge base and for people to understand the things that are going on.
And both of those are state law issues, not local issues, if I got it right.
There's a lot of state laws that present obstacles for us to be able to communicate in what I believe to be a very effective manner to our community.
Yeah, Mark, being a little modest, he's one of the best police auditors in the country, and is respected by his peers, other auditors. And the first several years of being on the council, the turmoil around this process was pretty intense and pretty amazing. And we have, especially leading up to the development of the ballot initiative and then working out the kinks and negotiating with the union and having all that stuff, was a very hard fought system that's in place that I think works. My success indicator for Mark was making sure it was whether or not he was on the front page of the Register Guard every other day. And I kidded him that he passed that pretty well. So thank you, Mark, and thank you to your staff for the work you've been doing over the last several years.
Well, it's mostly great staff. I have to say it as we're going along, just the three greatest people in the world in terms of public service. There's nobody better in public service. And the transition, especially that Beatrice has had to make, because we've closed down a major portion of her initial job duties, and the transition she's made to really help the city out during the COVID and the communication issues and things. It's just been, it's just really been an honor to work with them. And I have to say, for me, this is my 12th report. I'm surprised it's not the 13th since it's 2020. To think that I would be delivering 12 annual reports when I first came on board in 2009, I would find I would find that to be unusual. And so, again, thank you for your support.
Thank you. Jennifer, and then Greg wants a second round, and then we'll pitch it back to you, Leah.
Thank you. Well, I will agree with Alan. We got very lucky with you and your staff, and we're very fortunate to have all of you. First, I just wanted to thank Beatrice for being willing to answer some of those questions that are outside of what your actual job is. But we're so lucky to have you. It sounds like we need to clone you and stick you in other places. So we can think about that down the road. But I really appreciate you being willing to do that. I also want to thank Lindsay and everyone at the CRB. I'm lucky enough to get to work with Lindsay on the police commission, and I always find her thoughts very insightful. She uses the same words that Mark uses, that the CRB bears witness to these things. And I can see where being in that position can be somewhat frustrating because you're bearing witness, but there are things you don't get to see. There are things that you can't share, or and I appreciate you being willing to be in that spot and do that work because it is so important. And I do agree with you. I'm so glad that you guys meet more than 4 times a month, or 4 times a year than you're required to. And you mentioned how you wish that there was more that you guys could do. So I assume that's probably a group feeling. But I'm wondering, you know, do you know what that would take to be able? 9 cases is such a small percentage, and I like how you looked at different cases that covered different things. Like there was one that went into like the cell phone, the social media policy. There was one that looked at officers in their free time. You know, they did a whole lot, but if you could do more, you could look at more aspects of the policy. So I'm wondering if you've given that thought.
So I can say that this year in 2020, the CRB voted to meet monthly. So to increase our meetings from 9 to 12 and to review 2 cases per month. So to increase the reviews from 9 to 24, essentially, right?
Oh,
within
wow.
a 1-year period. So we have tried to do to the fullest extent of our personal capacity since we are the only ones who get to look at this, the 11 people, to maximize the things we look at. I think Alan's point is well taken that many of these complaints are like service level complaints, things that aren't maybe as troubling or disturbing. And we try at least once a year to look at several of those just so we get the full gamut, the full spectrum of complaints that come in. We do look at complaints that also we look at complaints where they're found to be within policy or they're unsustained. And I think that it's really important and thank you for noticing that we try to look at cases that deal with a very wide variety of issues. So the chair and vice chair are sort of tasked with deciding what are we going to look at, and the whole CRB can weigh in, but it's intentional that we try to kind of look at a wide variety of issues and concerns, both from a policy perspective and then from individual officer concerns as well. So we are trying to do our best to maximize the number of things that we can look at by increasing our meetings and the number of cases that we review. Of course, this has doubled the workload. It's also significantly increased the workload for staff, and they didn't even bulk. So again, the auditor's office has been phenomenally responsive and supportive to anything the CRB has asked for. In addition to those things, I think, yeah, like Mark said, we beat the same drum about it would be great if Oregon public records law were more transparent. I don't think that I'm some special person and therefore should have the right to view this material. I think this is material that is of public interest and in the service of the public to make available to more people. So I suppose that's sort of what we've been able to do to remedy in 2020, and what would be another possible step at the state level.
Right. I noticed you guys I appreciate how you always make sure to recommend trainings. It seems a theme that went through all the cases was that the CRB really looks at, how can training solve this, or is there training that can be done? And several of them mentioned young officers, and I'm wondering if that's a trend that you guys saw that, we've talked about before, that we have a lot of young officers and there are consequences that come with that. And is that something you guys saw, or it may be just the things that stuck in my head?
There are concerns across, I would say, the spectrum of tenure of EPD officers. So yes, there are a lot of more newly minted EPD officers. We also receive complaints, and allegations of serious misconduct against longstanding veteran officers. So I would say there are both. I'm trying not to spill over from 2019 into 2020 so much, which it becomes a little bit difficult for me mentally, but I will sort of anecdotally say that and I've said this at police commission table, so this isn't like something I haven't said before or that I haven't said to chief, but like I do have ongoing concerns about how we train and onboard new officers, the field training officer program. Because there's such a large percentage of new officers, we have a very large responsibility, particularly right now, to bring in an entire generation of EPD. And so the impacts of training and the skills and practices that they learn from their fellow officers are going to be consequential for a very long time. So I think that's an area that we can continue to put a good deal of focus on, and that would be worth ongoing investment.
Thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm not sure where to direct this question to, but either Lindsay or Mark, I think, can probably provide some background or some answers to this. So we often, police officers move from agency to agency. And I don't think, or maybe I'm not sure about this, their track records at a previous agency does not necessarily follow them to the next agency. So the two examples that I point out is this: the situation where there was a Lake Oswego captain that got hired in West Lynn as the chief, and then went on to commit numerous crimes. And it appears that nobody looked at his background before they hired him. The same thing happened in Cleveland when the officer that shot and killed Tamir Rice was being processed out of Independence, Ohio, and that department because of several, sustained allegations of misbehavior and misconduct. In a state as small as we are, officers move around for different issues. Maybe their spouses get, jobs, get job in another city in the state. They follow that individual. They follow their spouse, and subsequently they could get hired in another jurisdiction. What do we have in place to assure us that we're not picking up somebody else's problems when we're doing hiring? And I will note that the CSI that we supported through the payroll tax is about hiring, is significantly hiring more police officers because we have been understaffed for a number of years. So it's really important to me that we don't, have a situation where we're picking up some officers from another jurisdiction who have a history of complaints and misconduct on their jacket.
Well, for me personally, I have those same concerns about laterals. I'm not very much involved in the recruitment process. I know for the most part they do very vigorous background cases. They don't really, in my opinion, have a template or a group, as Lindsay mentioned also with the field training officers. I wish that program was more precise in terms of the selection of the people who do that training. But in terms of laterals, I think they do a very good job because they don't want to inherit someone else's problems. There have been a few. And in addition, you can go to that DPSST database, and I was actually surprised that someone who was failed on probation for slamming a person down at the jail actually did not lose their DPSST certification after several years of the review. So I think by and large, I think they've done a very good job. I think part of that equation is they're looking for cost savings in terms of having to retraining someone, and I'm not sure that that's always the best approach. What I see, to go back, I think to someone's questions versus young officers, for me the window is, and I think even the chief would agree with, the window is that 4 to 10 year career person. So when you first join the police department, you want to help people, and then about that, in that 4 to 10 years, you realize that you feel as if you're not going to have an impact on helping people. And that always seems to be the window. And I think in most of the cases that we look at in terms of excessive use of force, for example, it's usually an officer in that 4 to 10 year window. It's not the new person, because they may make mistakes, but they don't lose their temper, or they don't lose control during a contact with a person. So that's mostly sort of what I've seen, and I've seen it almost all over the country. And again, I think even the reports on that are the case. But I think Cincinnati, Eugene does a real good job on backgrounds. I can think of one case where the person was from Hawaii, and administrators thought that sending a detective to Hawaii to do the background was junketeering. And as it turned out, that ended up being an officer who had criminal charges and was fired. So it's not a place where you can cut corners in terms of the background. But I do wish they had a bit more precise background investigation process and a specific team to do that, so you get more consistency in that model.
So one other thing, Mark, our background protocols and procedures the same across agencies in Oregon, or do individual agencies have their own background check set of protocols and processes?
I think it's there's not a standard. There's not a state standard. So does, for example, a rural village in Central Oregon or something have a different standard than Eugene? I suppose that they probably do, but there's no state standards for that. But there is, again, that DPSST roster of people who have lost their certification in Oregon. Whether, if I'm the police chief, for example, in Phoenix, Oregon, am I interested in a person who is washed out in California or not? That would be up to each individual chief.
Thanks.
Okay.
Make me feel better, but thanks.
I know.
Leah.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, City Councilors. I have some slides on our report, but I can tell you all are extremely prepared and have clearly already read it. So I will go through the slides very quick, just to keep you awake for a little bit longer. I am sharing my screen. So if that works, give me a thumbs up. Thank you, Mayor. All right, let's get that in the actual slideshow. This is our annual report from 2019, as we've already mentioned. I, like Lindsay, will try to do the mental exercise of keeping 2019 and 2020 separate for purposes of tonight. Just an overview of sort of the structure of the report. We talked about our accomplishments in 2019, our goals and challenges for this year and next year, which are obviously developing as the year goes on, and then statistics from our 2019 report. Some of the things that stood out in 2019, the availability of body-worn camera evidence. Mark and I can request video from any incident that we need, and EPD has been very responsive about providing that to us. They are the keepers of the public record of those videos, but they're extremely responsive in getting those to us. Deadly force investigations, there were 3 in 2019. 1 is closed. 2, as of, I believe today, are still not quite closed. Mark and I are called to the scene of those critical incidents. We take part in the deadly force review boards. We are not a voting member on the board, but we do provide adjudication recommendations to the chief about the incidents. And then staffing the civilian review board, which we have discussed a lot tonight, so I'll move on. This is sort of what Councillor Evans was talking about, the data from the STOPS program. What the state's analysis of this data was that if I remember right, were that the stops of minority groups were not statistically significant in that there were not enough stops for them to really compare it accurately to the population numbers. And Mark, please correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's what I this is an overview of our community outreach. In 2019, we were able to have 2 very large public forum events, thanks to Beatrice, and they were well attended. They were frankly really fun. I enjoyed going to them. They were exclusively in, they're for our Latinx families, Spanish speaking events. And if you have questions, I know Beatrice is more than happy to talk more about her outreach efforts and those forums. We can't wait to have them again, hopefully next year. Some of our goals and challenges for 2020 and 2021 at the time I wrote this, which was early May, and things are obviously developing. Mark mentioned our early intervention system that we're working on implementing to identify officers who are perhaps having trouble or in need of training or assistance. We are working on our diversity, equity, and inclusion work as far as developing our trustful and meaningful community relationships. Just noting that inclusive community oversight is a pillar of both the NAACP and Black Lives Matter demands, as well as Campaign Zero and 21st Century Policing, which you all are very familiar with at this point. Obviously, the pandemic has been interesting for us to work with as a team. We have closed our office to walk-in traffic, but it does not seem to be affecting our numbers. I'll get to that in a second. But we are focused on accessibility and communicating with our community, even when we're not at our office in person. And then personnel issues and changes at EPD and our office. 2019, we had a high number of complaints. 446 was the highest number ever received by our office. It was an increase from 2018. Walk-ins were the source of about 15% of our complaints. So obviously it's not a small chunk, but as of a couple weeks ago, we are still on track for 400 complaints this year, which is still over our average. And this actually isn't in the report. I did this just for tonight, but you can see an overall trend line increasing over time. These were our specific allegations of misconduct. So there were 28 allegation of misconduct investigations, 4 allegation of criminal conduct investigations that included 61 specific allegations against 22 employees. And Sir Lindsay and Mark both mentioned this earlier, but one employee had 11 sustained allegations in 2019. So this is that pattern that we've seen where often we don't see every member of the department coming through our investigative process. And sometimes it's just a few. And Alan was speaking to this earlier about these were those bottom 3 categories with we call them, I think in the ordinance, they're allegations of minor misconduct. So they don't rise to the level of a major misconduct investigation, but they're still something we want to look at. So inquiries, policy complaints, service complaints, they all of them are increasing. So we have been busy. And that is that's our office way back when we got to go there. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen so we can take questions.
Thank you very much. I wonder, Alan had a sort of specific question from the earlier piece. I don't know, Alan, did that get answered? And I see in the queue.
Well, not specifically. So of the table on page 13 of the annual report, or 43 of our packet, the bottom 3, inquiry, police complaint, service complaint, are minor, according to the minor complaints. or minor violations or allegations, and the upper ones are major. So is it 124 of the 125 increase from 27 to 2019 were in that minor category? And there was a little bit in alleged misconduct, but criminal conduct stayed the same. Incident review went down. And so I'm wondering how you characterize this. To me, it kind of seems like major kind of stayed the same and minor went up dramatically. And I guess I'm trying to ask why.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is what Claire said, which is if you do a good job and it works, people use it. And I think that's part of what's been going on. There's more awareness of the police auditor's office, and people tell them go call. I tell people to call the police auditor's office all the time.
Good.
So it's part of that. But what do you think, Lacey?
Yeah, I mean, I partially blame Beatrice for our increased workload because she is out there letting everybody know about our office and what we do, and hopefully over time our reputation for helping people out is also moving that forward. Mark also mentioned is I think that policy complaint increase, a lot of our complaints around prohibited camping in its various forms go into that policy complaint category. So I would not be surprised if that accounted for our increase in policy complaints.
So those are not policies that an officer did something wrong against the policy. It's not our policy. They don't like our policy.
Exactly.
Whatever that policy is, like camping. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And
So that's not really.
One of the two things that I've noticed this year, and I don't remember one complaint from someone about racial profiling. And the way the process works, even if the person just sort of mutters it under their breath to an officer, the officer immediately calls for a supervisor. The supervisor comes out and does an initial investigation and then things like that. And those have been extraordinarily rare. And we used to get a lot more complaints from people about, well, I shouldn't have got the speeding ticket or things like that. So things that we used to get a lot more complaints that would be routed through the court system. Those are very rare too. So I found that of interest. I think where I've seen an uptick is again on people are very passionate about the camping,
About what?
The camping issue.
Oh.
Illegal camping, whether it's in the parks and things like that. And again, I think part of that is a symptom of the COVID, as well as a lot of agencies aren't able to service people. And then response times on things seem to have diminished, but in terms of how officers have been responding to conflicts, neighbor conflicts, spousal conflicts, partner conflicts, where they've tried to mediate those a little bit more, because again, we only have 15 to 20 jail beds per night, so it's pretty limited in that regard, and also not arresting people who are standing on the sidewalk in front of their house just yelling at their house or the street lamp or something like that. I think that's where I've seen, at least anecdotally, sort of increases in terms of where we get those service complaints and those inquiries.
Yeah, one more question. So how many cases are there that you come to a different conclusion and the CRB comes to a different conclusion than the chief? Where you're at?
We had a pretty
opposite ends.
Chief that we had a disagreement about a taser case, and I think in that case that Lindsay mentioned, which I had actually forgotten, and I still believe that we have a better adjudication in that case. It's extraordinarily rare. I suppose part of that is that this chief and the previous chief have a great deal of respect for my opinion and Leah's opinion and our analysis. We do have one of those pending deadly force cases where I think that my opinion is that they were probably surprised at the depth of which we analyzed that. And so it's going to be real curious to see how that comes. But I can only think of 2 cases in the almost 12 years that I've been here where that's occurred. And
where you've disagreed with the chief.
Where the chief disagreed with us because we give them the recommended adjudication and the chief makes a final decision on adjudication. And Leah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can only remember 2 cases, and Lindsay had to point out the second one because I had forgotten about that one. But it's pretty rare. I think
2 out of hundreds.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the impression, that we're always disagreeing about things, but I think that the chief has a great deal of respect for the decisions we make. I don't think we've got as much traction with the chain of command as we have had with the chief in terms of some of these decisions. And I'm not sure why there's necessarily that disconnect, but certainly I think we had one, I wish I could remember it fairly recently, where the chain of command all said that the officer acted appropriately. 2 cases, and the chief said no, the officer did not act appropriately. So I think that's a bit of a hurdle for us still with the chain of command.
One more question. Some of this stuff is around police policy, and what I'm getting at is what's the influence over police auditor CRB in police policy? I mean, a good example is high-speed chases, where you guys worked on that for years, and finally the police department said we're not going to do high-speed chases anymore. Can you talk about that, how that works, and what's the incidence of that, and some of the examples?
Well, it's pretty rare now, and they know that I don't like it because, again, about 1/3 of the people that are killed in this country every year in high-speed chases are innocent people. And so if someone runs a red light, it's not worth racing through our neighborhoods where there are people about to catch that person. I think we've made excellent strides on the use of the canines, or in layman's terms, dogs. And I think we've made a lot of progress in that particular area. I don't think we've quite found, I feel as if we're sort of plateauing a little bit on sort of those mid-level uses of force between taser and pepper spray and what they call focus blows, which are basically punches to some part of the body. I don't think we've found that equilibrium yet. I know that officers don't like pepper spray because they're impacted by it as well. It's pretty nasty stuff, and it's lingering for about 24 hours. So if you come in contact with that, you're impacted as well. So I'm still looking. I think when we had a more veteran staff, that there was more equilibrium in that regard, but I still feel personally as if we haven't quite found that equilibrium on some of these uses of force. And I think the other part we have to think about too, long-term in terms of policy, which is part of the national narrative, is this over-policing of minor offenses that end up in, and I know Lindsay talks about it a lot, over-policing of minor offenses that turns into some level of violence between an officer and the person involved. And so, that a pedestrian violation in turns into a life or death situation for both parties involved is that's really where I think we need to have focus a lot of our attention on is what's really important here. And is there a better way to do these kinds of things or deal with these kinds of things in a manner that does not end up in violence so often? And I'll pass the torch to Lindsay because I know she has some policy issues.
No, Mark, I think you touched all the things that I would say. I'm glad you brought up the issue of chain of command when it comes to the differences and discrepancies in adjudication. I think that has been sort of striking this year. Ellen, can I answer or just like add something about your comment, how often? It's very, very rare. And I think that's great. And I think the two chiefs that I've worked with over my service of the CRB have been exemplary in their dedication to helping the civilian oversight process be robust and legitimate, and they don't hinder that process. I think I also think that it's worth thinking about policy in terms not only of individual personalities, but also sort of setting things up so that structurally, regardless of the individual personalities of the actors, you've got good policies in place for what to do if there are disagreements. And the auditor chief relationship may not always be as functional as it is now for any host of reasons. So I think it's good to think about if there's things that we might want to have in place for what happens when the auditor and the chief disagree on adjudications, even though right now it's extraordinarily rare. And even though now when it occurs, our chief is the kind of person who explicitly explains why he is disagreeing with the auditor's adjudication. It's not necessarily required that he do so. And so anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that.
And if I may just chirp in a little bit, I think what the community also forgets is the city manager is the hiring authority. The city manager delegates these responsibilities to the chief. So if there was a person that would make the final decision, ultimately it's the city manager because she's the hiring authority. And so I think our community forgets that because our city managers have done a great job of delegating those responsibilities to the department directors. But at the end of the day, other than my office, the city manager is the city's hiring authority.
Thank you. Very helpful conversation. Jennifer and then Greg.
Yeah, thank you. So I was hoping this graph would be on there so I wouldn't have to admit I'm not sure if I'm reading it correctly, but the graph on the same page, Alan, I guess it's page 13, but on the bottom, if I'm reading it right, it looks like internal complaints. So complaints from, I assume, people already within the police department have been going down since 2016. Is that, am I reading that right?
You are, and if I want to be fancy, if people want, I can pull that up. My Zoom capabilities have expanded. But you're exactly right. I think part of that is there was a designation in the database for auditor initiated versus internally initiated, and that has been inconsistently applied. If I go back, sometimes I see it was assigned to an auditor initiated, and sometimes it's internal. And sometimes, honestly, it is a bit muddled as far as we have a conversation, and out of that conversation, an investigation is initiated, and who gets credit? So, but you are correct. And interestingly, while the number of internal complaints has decreased, the number of overall complaints and the number of serious misconduct allegations has not decreased. So I find those interesting, but and Mark may have more to weigh in on there.
I was just concerned that if it's like if we're seeing a huge, like if we saw a huge decrease in officers willing to step up, then I would be concerned. But it sounds like it might not be that so much as categorizing.
I would say that, at least anecdotally, I don't feel like there's a less likely atmosphere for people to report or self-report or internally report.
And me personally, I think the culture has changed for the good in terms of people not feeling as if they can get away with something in front of their colleagues and it goes unreported. And why we maybe don't see as strong as language in the blue team. In other words, when the supervisor writes a report about a use of force or something like that, there's enough information in there for Lee or I to say, okay, we'd like to see the body worn camera on these things. Historically, most of the internally generated complaints are either Leah or I. They're just under internally generated. But again, as I said, this week we saw 2 lieutenants step up and say, no, we're not going to tolerate this behavior and we need some action on that.
Well, that's so important. And I know in the past you've mentioned how you felt like you had a good relationship, that people were comfortable coming to you. So I just wanted to make sure that wasn't changing. It sounds like no. So that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, Greg.
I didn't see this in the report, so I don't know if you can address this anecdotally or not. But are you keeping any count or statistics on the number of complaints that police are responding to around homeless camps, around crime that might be occurring in those camps? We get a lot. The council gets a lot of emails about that. Both pro and negative. But are the homeless themselves coming in, or are lodging complaints against police for misconduct, or are we just having more people who are doing that on behalf of the homeless? So that's one question.
Mark may want to weigh in more on this. I had to go back and check. There was some shading at the end. It's kind of hard to piece out, but I would say we could do more picking apart of the numbers on that. What we did this year was in that Appendix B, which has all of the complaints in its voluminous 46-page appendix, things that were highlighted in yellow were focused on policing and the unhoused. And that was either way, as far as over policing the unhoused or under policing the unhoused, sort of depending on the point of view of the person complaining. And so we did note that is a very common issue that we look at, but no, I haven't specifically pulled out those numbers.
And in terms of crime reporting, I think, as she said, I want to say it was 40 against homeless camping and 29 that there's over policing of homeless camping. It's pretty rare that, especially now that we can't because of COVID, that we get people who feel as if they're being over policed, but we still get that. I think a lot of the camps start out well intended, but as anyone would know, eventually the predators move in and you sort of get this hierarchy of control over who's running the camp and who's not running the camp. And so then eventually you have to break up the camp because the crime rate in that little mini community picks up. But generally speaking, we don't hear much from the homeless population. And again, I think part of that's the COVID thing. We do have vigorous community members and business owners that are very upset about camping and the unhoused population in our city.
So, since we're not having that many complaints statistically against police actions in this realm, so when we end up calling the police and they notify folks that they have to move, they have to break up the camp, that kind of thing, we're not seeing any major conflict. People are basically complying with the police officers that are telling them to move and this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. There were, I don't know if it's still the case, there were 2 officers who were specifically dedicated for that. And then for a while, there was a lieutenant also, again, interacting. I think it's pretty rare, even compared to 5 years ago, of heavy-handedness in that area, because again, people know that they can just move to another location. So I think anecdotally, I think the heavy-handedness about those situations has diminished significantly. But again, it's just an ongoing community problem, and just too daunting in my view.
So we're not, writing more citations than are necessary, with regard to the homeless population. Those kind of things are issues that are brought up quite often when people are talking about the criminalization of the homeless. I really want to I'd like to drill down in that to see, are we really, statistically criminalizing homeless people more than we are other citizens? I will note that, African American men are mostly criminalized going all the way back to before the Civil War. And it seems to be that trend continues even in Eugene. But are we creating an atmosphere where we are criminalizing the homeless by giving them tickets that they could never pay, other citations in that realm?
I think for the most part, they're warning them. It wasn't that far back where I think about 23% of the arrests or citations were of the homeless population. I'm thinking 2015. I think in Portland a few years back, it was upwards of 70%. And I hope I'm right about that. So I have seen less of people coming in and complaining about that. I think they really do try to problem solve more, because giving them a citation is just a waste of the paper and the pen, because they're not going to go to court and pay the fines and things like that. So I think they are, I think there's a far greater effort to problem solve rather than to prosecute.
Yeah, that sounds positive and proactive to me. So thanks for that update. We don't keep those same type of statistics that Portland does, correct?
I think they still do. And again, if you reach out to Lieutenant Tinseth at EPD, he's a statistical geek, I might say. And so he has an awful lot of that information and does a great job of compiling all those stats for you. And I think that you would find him of great value to get that information.
I just was trying to see if you were realizing any of those complaints, in your office.
I think generally they're down, honestly, but again, that might be COVID related also.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much. Unless anyone has one last question, we are just about at time. So I just want to thank you again. I think this has been a really informative conversation. The reports were excellent. They were just full of information. Clearly, council found it compelling, and it's been a great conversation. So thank you all for your work and for contributing to our building a better community in the ways that you do. And council, we are adjourned until 7:30. Thank you so much.
Thank you.